But then there's Kris Boyd. And there's a lot of things Kris Boyd could have done this week. Pay tribute to Jeff Gladney, which I'm guessing he did. But, of course, it's all about the sensationalism of media. And Patrick Peterson, as you pointed out, has a podcast. And Kris Boyd made a comment on his podcast about the coaches, about that he felt like players and coaches walked around with their buttholes tight. That sphincter, like I always say, is tight.
I knew you would bring up the sphincter. You got to bring up the sphincter.
Then he also said that he felt like if they made a mistake, the world was over. This is what I'll say to that. And then you can give me your thoughts.
Yeah.
One, so what? Like the world is not fair. Life is not fair. There's so much in this world that's never going to be perfect. Bosses, CEOs, if you work for somebody, you have to deal with their work environment. Now, you have two choices: leave or figure out a way to make it work. And this is what I'll say. I used to hear stuff about that, about certain Gophers coaches. And people would say that about their, oh, man, I feel like they're always yelling at us, or this coach always yells at me. I never got that. Maybe because, I was giving them 1,000 yards a season, maybe because of the touchdowns, maybe because I was the number one receiver on the team. Who knows? But I never felt that way. If I made a mistake, I just made a mistake and I moved on. Like, I didn't feel like the world was over. Now, I will say this. When I got to the NFL, I did feel like that at times, like that if I made a mistake, like, shoot, like, I'm thinking about it all day. Why? Because I was on the verge at any point of being cut. I wasn't a star. I was a fringe guy playing special teams. I was a third wide receiver. So I was a fringe guy. I was a guy that if they drafted another guy the next year, I possibly was out. Every year I'm watching the draft like, please don't draft a receiver. And so when you think about that, I think it's about perspective of how you take to coaches. Like, I think there's a certain aura around certain players that can say that. Now, yes, now you're getting more and more players that are saying this, and stars, Eric Kendricks, other guys are saying this, and they're talking about more in the locker room stuff, more walking through the hall stuff. But Kris Boyd is talking like football stuff. He's talking football like world is open. Not I walked upstairs and I grabbed a salad on chicken day. He's talking on the field stuff. And so I bet if he didn't make some of the mental errors that he made, if he didn't make some of the mistakes that he made, I don't think he would have felt that way, that the world was over every time he made a mistake. I feel like maybe because they were coming down on him as that guy, and honestly, let's be honest, corners are on the stage at all times. I just watched a bunch of Jamar Chase highlights, and I'm thinking about the corners he was going against. Those guys probably thinking the same thing, like, oh my God, like, how did I do it again? When you make a play and you're in the right position, hey, but when you make a play, when you miss a play, you should have been there. And if you were there, the coach, you would have done it right. If you listened to the coach and you would have made the play, but you weren't, so you messed up, then yeah, it weighs on you. So I do think like coaches should do a better job of like talking to players, like Daryl Reed. We talked to Daryl Reed, and at some point, you'll hear more from Daryl Reed, but he talks about Tony Dungy's kind of even keel. He's never going to yell at you. He's, no matter how good it is, how bad it is, he's always going to find that middle ground and minister to you. Well, that was Tony Dungy's style. Could Zimmer have used a little Dungy? Maybe. Like, you never know. But I just feel like at this point, it's just sensational. They're beating a dead horse. It's going to be amazing to me. And I pray that this doesn't happen to the Vikings. But if they don't have good seasons in the next 2 or 3 years and it becomes this Brad Childress type atmosphere, I think people are going to look back like, man, maybe they need an authoritarian. They need an authoritative figure. They needed somebody to yell at them. But now we don't know. Kevin, like, he hasn't even had a chance to do a game yet. So we don't know. Like, when he sees a mistake, maybe he is a yeller. Who knows? Maybe he's a quiet talker like Dungy. But I don't see a problem, honestly, in the end. I don't see a problem with Kris Boyd's comments. Like, it is what it is. Like, that's how you felt. Great. I just think people are going to put it out there because it's sensational to say Zimmer's name with bad culture. It's just one of those things. Like, PJ Fleck and roll the boat for a couple years. That was the way to like beat a dead horse. Now it's just the culture. You don't see it as a negative anymore. People don't constantly bring it up. They're running out the tunnel, the other stuff PJ does. Nobody brings it up. But Sam, I mean, what do you think about Kris Boyd's comments?
Yeah, I think it shows the growing gap between sort of that old school no nonsense approach and the younger player in today's game. And the old coaches love to complain about how no one wants to be coached anymore. They don't want to be criticized. And I mean, the reality is that it takes a little more delicate touch. And I don't know if Mike Zimmer had the most bedside manner of all time. Kevin O'Connell probably does. But here's where he loses me just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Kris Boyd was undisciplined on the field. When he was in games, he made mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Special teams, he made silly errors. He committed penalties. So when you're making mistakes in games, it seems apparent that you needed instruction during practice, and Kris
Mm-hmm.
Boyd hadn't earned their trust. Now, if that comment comes from someone like Kendricks, who is an all-pro, is one of the best linebackers in football, starter on the team, it carries a little more weight with me. But when it comes from someone who's been on the bench, struggling to see the field, it feels a little more like sour grapes. So I get why you want to, have a little better relationship with your coach. That's certainly respectable. But it seems to me like Kris Boyd needed that intervention to play better because he kept making those mistakes. And that's why he's been kind of a role player for the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm. And this is one thing I will say, though. PJ Fleck, I love the way he says you have to coach every kid differently. He talks about his background as a teacher, and he's like, I forgot what he taught, but he talks about being in a classroom of 5th or 6th graders or some or 1st grade, I don't know, but 5th or 6th graders. And he's like, you can't teach every kid the same way. You have to learn that kid, take the time to learn them, and then teach them. Some kids are better at math than others. Some kids are better at spelling than others. Some kids are better at social studies than others. You have to learn, like this kid might learn with flashcards. This kid learns by me writing on the board. This kid learns by doing it himself and just self-teaching and reading. But you have to learn that. You can't force every kid to self-teach. You can't force every kid to watch me write on a whiteboard. You can't force every kid to use flashcards. Every kid has a different way of learning. And maybe that was maybe the problem. PJ Fleck coaches every player a little bit differently. He knows Rashad Bateman from Tyler Johnson from Chris Altman-Bell. Each guy is going to be a little bit different in the approach, the way you can talk to him, what you can say to him. You know how to get the best out of him. Tyler being a quiet guy doesn't need you to be all rah, rah, rah with him. Rashad as well. Chris Altman-Bell likes that. He likes the jumping and the pushing and the physicality of a coach. But you have to learn that. You have to learn that. And so, maybe that's part of it. Maybe Kris Boyd, because he wasn't Patrick Peterson, because he wasn't, Cam Dantzler or Jeff Gladney, a first-round draft, third-round draft pick, that they didn't take the time to learn him. And maybe that's what he felt. He felt like, I don't feel like I'm getting enough attention. And PJ coaches everybody. He says that from the top to the bottom. And but that's something in college you have time to do, and you're growing an 18-year-old. Where in the NFL, this might be the 1 year you have this guy, and then you got to move on to the next year with a new group of guys because this guy, those guys didn't make it. You're going to keep your guys, around. So it's just a different beast coming from college in Texas. You know what I mean? Like DBU as they think they call themselves, but now I think it's LSU. Who knows? But when you see that, that's where I think it comes from. It comes from maybe a guy that wasn't coached the way he probably needed to be coached, and you can't blame him for that. Like I think that's another part of it. Like every player learns differently, and you know what? If they couldn't find a way to unlock the greatness of Kris Boyd or the ability of Kris Boyd or the mental wherewithal of Kris Boyd, we'll see. Because if this year, if he does look a lot better, plays a lot better, then you can say it was coaching. But if he looks the same, it is what it is. And if he makes a mistake now, I guarantee this staff, because defensive coaches I don't care what you say about culture. Defensive coaches are a different group of beasts. And when you make a mistake on defense, those coaches are pissed off. Offense is a little bit more, boutique. It's a little bit different style. Defense is hard-nosed, smack people in the mouth. Like, it's a different group of coaches because they played it. You look at Minuski and some of those, those guys are crazy. And they're coaching. And so now you put crazy and coaching together and you get a bad result on the field, you're going to get a crazy reaction. And I will see what this year brings up, though. If you enjoy the Ron Johnson Show, you'll enjoy our other daily show on Locked On Sports Minnesota. It's superior sports talk with KAROL Sports Director Reggie Wilson and his co-host Luke Inman. Whether it's Twins, Vikings, Wolves, or Wild, Reggie and Luke have it covered. All the breaking news and big opinions. Catch the show 5 days a week by subscribing to Locked On Sports Minnesota's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.